Turn-of-the-century Cincinnati is exciting and industrious, a hard-working, difficult yet rewarding place to be. The Ohio River defines this Midwestern industrial city. The river presents opportunity for trade, commerce, and construction. The city's hills carve out neighborhoods that are increasingly populated by immigrants from Germany, Italy, and Ireland. European immigrants coming between 1840 and 1870 fled a series of poor harvests, famine, unemployment, and other devastating conditions. Many chose Cincinnati. By 1850, Germans made up 1/3 of Cincinnati's population. Gerard Joseph Matthew Neyer was born in Covington, Kentucky in 1856. His father, Johann, had immigrated from Germany 9 years before, no different from others in his desire to find a better life. Gerard Joseph simply was called Joseph throughout his life, and like others in the Neyer family, found good work in the building trades. Later, with his son Henry Joseph, forged the beginnings of a construction company that continues today as a Neyer family business in Cincinnati, one that honors its past and continues to build its future here and in cities across America.
Ancestors came from northern Germany, as did the Neyers from northern Germany. So they had made communication with the people over there, Henk and Barons on Phyllis's side and the Neyers on my side. And they spent a week with each in the same city, actually, in northern Germany. But they went to a Catholic church that was built by a Neyer in 1720, who was an ancestor of ours, and they traced the lineage down. So, we were doing this 300 years ago.
More than 100 years after its founding, Al Neyer Incorporated has established itself in real estate development and design-build construction, planning and building industrial parks, corporate headquarters, parking garages, and restoring historic buildings. Its core values that herald fairness, integrity, and devotion to improving communities have never been stronger and are rooted in the company's earliest years. The modern-day Neyer Company's standards of conduct and fairness are ideas that date back to its founding, but it was the company's growth from small, competitive bid construction projects into land development and design-build project delivery that was predetermined at mid-century when Joseph Neyer Jr.'s 3 grandsons, Donald, Raymond, and Thomas, began directing the company into setting a new course for the future. The early Neyer family story is intertwined in the story of Cincinnati itself. Cincinnati, Ohio is an indisputably German town. The city's German heritage has left an indelible imprint on every aspect of the city. The city's festivals, its Oktoberfests, are legendary for their authentic food, beer, and music. German immigrants played an important role in establishing important industries, from baking to banking to brewing. Many companies started during the wave of immigration during the early 1900s and are still in operation. In 1847, the Neyer family followed in the paths that many others had taken, coming to Cincinnati from northern Germany. By the late 1880s, the city had grown to become the largest in Ohio, with almost 300,000 people. By the turn of the century, Joseph Neyer Sr. and his son worked together on commercial building projects all over the region. Other German landmarks of this era include the Roebling Suspension Bridge, built by Johann Roebling, and the Tyler Davidson Memorial Fountain, completed in Munich and erected in Cincinnati in 1871. The Neyer family's contributions to the Cincinnati building community became bigger, more architecturally complex, more prominent over the early part of the next century.
But when my dad retired, he had built 37 churches and schools in the Cincinnati area, and that was a real proud accomplishment for him.
In 1920, Joseph Neyer Jr. and his son Alphonse incorporate, and by now his company's buildings are identifiable in Cincinnati. Joseph and a few colleagues work on area churches and schools. Big jobs that lead to bigger jobs with bigger crews. Alphonse joined the business after graduating from St. Xavier High School in Cincinnati. By the early 1930s, everyone in the country shares in the despair of the Great Depression. Alphonse finds his entire portfolio of land wiped away when the bank called in the loans. Like the rest of the country, he does what he can to earn a living.
In the Depression era, Joe Neyer got out. About 1928, he got out of the business, and which was a very smart thing to do. My father, Al, then rode it up and down, and he was at one time doing extremely well. He always told me, at one time, he had the third highest income tax in the whole city of Cincinnati. He was proud of that. That was about 1929 or something around that, when he was 28 years old, and he was very proud of that. But then he took the real lumps. He just took a hard knock. So he lost most of what he had. And when he got married in 1928, he moved into a house that he had built and paid for. It was paid for in full on Linwood Road. He had built it. George McDonald built the house, designed the house rather, and Dad built it. And they moved in. They got married in 1928, and the house was free and clear. And about after 5 years, he had to mortgage the house because he didn't have any money, and he had to create a mortgage on it. And he tells me, and I can't support this, that he used to chase coal trucks to see where they were going to get the privilege of unloading the coal and put it in somebody's coal bin because he didn't have any money at all.
Alphonse Neyer and his wife Gertrude and 3 children, Donald, Raymond, and Thomas, persevered through the hard times in the home Al and his father built at 3530 Linwood Avenue. Al may have lost his enthusiasm for the land development business, but only temporarily. By the 1930s, he had taken on some remodeling projects and worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base near Dayton.
In about early 40s, he was too old for the Second World War. He decided he would go back into little remodeling, and so it was just Al Neyer individual at that time.
In 1947, Al incorporates the company and changes its name to Al Neyer Incorporated. The company specializes in institutional buildings and is located in the basement of the family's Mount Lookout home, in a total of about 100 square feet on Linwood Avenue.
He was building sidewalks for neighbors and remodeling their garages and doing all kinds of small little things. They were not big projects.
Alphonse Neyer established his offices at 7140 Longview Avenue, across from the Longview State Hospital. They worked out of that location until 1953.
For years, he had this property in Carthage on Longview Street, right adjacent to Longview State Hospital. So in I guess it's about 1949, now it must have been 48, he built this little shop over there. And the office was 10 by 20. And that included, all the office included one bathroom. And to get through the shop, you had to walk through the bathroom because that was the only door into the shop. And so the shop was about 30 by 50, as I recall. And then there was a yard outside where we stored the forms and so forth.
What spurred that? I guess the need to have a yard more than anything. And I think he got tired he had grown enough that having all the subcontractors come in and literally work their way through the laundry which was hanging in the basement.
Al Neyer and his wife concerned themselves with making sure their sons develop a strong work ethic and get a good education. Even more important to him was that his sons learned the value of trust. He kept a box of money on his dresser. The boys didn't have allowances then, but if they needed money, they took what they needed from that box on an honor system.
My first work experience was for my grandfather, Joe Neyer. And he had worked at the Rookwood Pottery. I guess his job was to destroy the rejects. We all worked for the company. It was good work. But there was requirement to work.
First job we ever worked on, Don and I was 8, and I think, I was probably 9, Don was 8. It was out in Glendale. And it was, Dad had putting up a garage. And on the weekend, and he had Don and I up on the roof, nailing sheeting on the roof. And Dad was very careful. He snapped lines on there, said where to put the nails. Well, we found out that if we moved the nail over 1 inch, it would drive so much easier. So it went right on down, but of course it didn't hit anything below, it just hit air below. That made it a lot easier to drive. And to say the least, he was a little bit upset with us. But that's all right, I remembered it.
Alphonse instills values early in his sons' lives and makes it a lifelong lesson through example. He never graduates from college, but attends classes at area universities. His love of learning is evident to his family, and he guides his children to graduate from college.
Basically, Dad was a no-frills person. I mean, a lot of people were scared to death of him. But boy, he had a heart of gold. He very seldom lost his temper, which it took me a long time to learn how to control that. He did not tell people how to do things. He said, here's what we have to do, and work with them to figure out the way of doing it.
In 1948, I started over at XU, and immediately I started working at the office, taking care of the books. We had a young lady by the name of Pat Tenbig, who was there as a part-time secretary, part-time whatever. She was the only person there in the office other than my father. And so I would go over and take care of the books, because that was my major, was accounting. And so I was just doing, and I got to accounting because my father said to me, you should go to XU and take accounting. I said, okay. So we did what our father taught us to do. And I don't know whether he just had insight as to what our talents were, or he just thought this is logical. So in any case, we did what Dad said to do. He was a thinking man. He loved to analyze everything. And we would have, Sunday, we would all gather around the dining room table and we'd have a standing rib roast, and we'd get in discussions. And we'd pull out this Webster's dictionary that was this big, and we would have arguments about what the meanings of words were. And this was when we were in 16, 17, 18 on, until we left home. And from that point on, it began obvious. Dad would say one thing, and I would always take the opposite position, whatever it was, and we would argue. And he'd walk away from me, and I'd follow him. When Ray and Dad would argue, they would come at loggerheads and each go this way, go opposite directions. But he couldn't get rid of me. I just follow him wherever he's going. And he just would get incensed that I wouldn't just drop the issue, because I didn't want to drop the issue.
Al is an abbreviation of his name, and he thought it proper to retain the punctuation. His two eldest sons served duty in Korea in the early 1950s. Tom is in school.
There wasn't a great decision. You went to high school, you went to college. There was no great thought of what college I should go to. There was never any question where I should go to high school. It was just the place where I went. And that was, preordained. My uncle was a Jesuit, and you wouldn't think of going somewhere other than, say, next high school.
In 1953, the Neyer family building contracting company moves to larger quarters, 625 square feet to 3715 Red Bank Road. Ray and Don both return from military service and go to work, continuing to learn the business from their father. Don estimates jobs, and Ray works in construction. In 1959, after graduating from Xavier University, younger brother Tom is ready to consider his future.
I do remember when I finished college, Don, I'm graduating from college. What am I going to do? Where am I going to go? You and Ray are taking care of everything on Einkrop, but there's no room for me. And they said, come on, we'll find something for you to do. And so we did. And I came in, I basically managed a shop, and I was the chief mechanic and truck driver for a long time. And that was fine too. And then Don was doing more estimating, needed a little help in the bookkeeping, so I went in the office and did some of that. Ray was generally field operation, Don was generally sales, and I was administration. It started out, obviously my father was all those things. And then when Ray came in, he was a civil engineer. Don liked estimating and numbers. Don's always liked numbers. And he was very good at numbers. So he did the estimating. He did the accounting initially. But his love was the numbers and the estimating. And then ultimately sales. Initially, we weren't salesmen. Until we got into real estate, we competitively bid everything. And you didn't have to. All you had to do was a low price. So with real estate, it became a sales thing. Don did that, and then of necessity, I took over the accounting portion of it.
I got out of the Army in September of '54, and you got out in November of '54. December, okay, December. And all of a sudden, Dad's faced with me coming back, and then Ray came back. And Ray came back with the view that we could bid a job at cost, and somehow or other we'd make money at it, because there was enough ways to save money. And I think in frustration, Grandpa wrote these notes to himself, not to us, but rather to himself, to remind himself that there's more than one view on this thing, and everybody's entitled to it.
Al Neyer Incorporated still operates from a document Alphonse wrote in his own hand, dated November 11th, 1954. He called it Rules of Conduct in Relations with Fathers and Sons Associated in Business. Its insistence on mutual respect guides the family today. Rule number 1, remember always that everyone is working to attain the same objective. Rule number 2, experience alone is not enough. It must be analyzed and evaluated. Rule number 3, original ideas and thoughts are not confined to one individual. Rule number 4, greatest opportunities lie in diversity, ideas, progress, initiative, incentive. Rule number 5, we are all entitled to be heard on each phase of any subject. Rule number 6, the family relationship should not allow degeneration of differences into quarrels. We differ with our friends, but do not allow these differences to interfere with personal feelings. Rule number 7, fathers should call on their past experiences with others and accord to their sons at least as courteous treatment as is given to others.
I worked with my two brothers for all these years with the assumption that I can't change them and they can't change me. I mean, that's my serenity prayer, which maybe somebody talked about. I had on the wall all the time. You've got to realize we're all different, we're all unique, and we all have our own little idiosyncrasies. We had an equal arrangement, and we shared equally the goods and the bads, and it was a good way to do it for us. Every business needs some kind of a succession plan or some kind of a separation plan, and you come to a point of impasse. Well, you don't need these kind of fights. So have a built-in a way of separating when you have to, whatever that might be.
With Al's oversight, the brothers continued to build the company in an increasingly competitive environment. In the boom of the 1960s, Neyer's projects grew in significance and the company forged deep relationships with several long-term clients. During this time, Neyer was working on his most significant project to date, Our Lady of Cincinnati College, a small Catholic urban school sponsored by the Sisters of Mercy Order. Edgecliff Library was followed by Grace Hall of Science and Sullivan Hall, and other campus buildings. Edgecliff is now a growing part of the University of Cincinnati and remains a favorite project.
Most probably some of the bigger projects would have been Our Lady of Cincinnati College. Later Edgecliff, later Xavier University, currently Ocas for the University of Cincinnati. We built, there was an old building, Emory Hall, from the Emory family. We remodeled that several times. Then we built, I guess the next thing was a dormitory, which was sort of the first high-rise that I remember, and that was maybe 6 or 7 stories.
Then there was Grace Hall, then there was the theater.
And before that, there was the library.
Library building, yeah. And then Grace Hall, and then Sullivan Hall, and and then there was the Mercy Center, which I mean is not the college, but it is still the Sisters of Mercy. And those are.
But prior to that time, part of the same time, we worked over at Good Sam Hospital for 15 years, and never left.
By the early 1960s, it was clear that the company had to change. Bidding wars resulted in margins that got leaner and then non-existent.
The first job we got was a school, and this is about 8 months after we started working. The first job we got was a school out in off of North Bend Road. I've forgotten the school district. We were a low bidder with good reason because we bid too low. And this began a sequence. We did this for many, many years. So from 54 until 63, we were doing competitive contract construction. We were bidding every school that came down the road, every hospital, everything that came down that we could qualify for, we were bidding. But we were bidding everything competitive that we could. And if we'd get one job out of 30, that's 3% success rate, that was great, because that was unusual. And the markups was shrinking. It started out at maybe 6-7%, it got down to 3% gross markup. And you can't survive at that, because our overhead was exceeding that.
As chief estimator, Don recalls the bidding process, defined by a series of virtually snap decisions made on dozens of details. Even small omissions or oversights would erode a project's profit potential.
In the space of a couple of hours, you try and compress, and this is on a competitive contract, not design build. There's 300-400 quotes from all these subcontractors, and you're trying to see, well, who includes what, who doesn't include what.
In 1963, the brothers purchased the company's first land for commercial development, a 20-acre tract from landowner Clayton Cannell. It built its own corporate offices there the same year, 900 square feet at 3800 Red Bank Road, the center of our commercial universe, as described by a family member. As the sons turned away from competitive bidding and embraced land development, Alphonse stepped back.
It was 1963 that we bought the property, and it was pretty obvious from that point on that Dad didn't feel comfortable with what was going on. But again, he had the courage or the wisdom to let us do it anyway, because you can't restrict the next generation.
Alphonse Neyer left the day-to-day operation of Al Neyer to his sons in 1971, selling all of his ownership to them and walking away to work in his garden and on philanthropic interests. He died in 1979. Each of the brothers ultimately got the chance to lead the growing company. Don presided as the president the longest and became an early champion of the design-build method of project delivery over competitive bid construction. Design-build requires integration of design services and construction at the bidding stage and provides a client with many advantages, including design flexibility and budget control. It assures the client of one responsible party that takes total ownership of the process. Don's contributions to the development of design-build and the Cincinnati construction industry are renowned. Throughout the 60s, the company's commitment to design-build is evident as it works on its first real estate development project, Neyer Industrial Park in Fairfax. By the end of the decade, the company is working on some of the largest projects in the region, including Beachmont Mall, owned by Cincinnati financier Carl Lindner.
The first design-build project that I'm aware of, it was a Catholic church in St. Bernard. And it was 4 or 8 classrooms, concrete block. It was a very poor parish. And so I think for $40,000, Dad built them either 4 or 8 classrooms. And that was it was probably designed by Howard Mendel, I suspect, Howard Mendel being Dad's brother-in-law. But it was very simple, very, concrete block, simple bar joists, wood trusses on a roof. I don't know if the building might still stand for all I know, but you couldn't, we did build very economically. That was one thing when we started our first industrial park. It was done good value, not cheap, but just a good value. What brought us into the bigger times, this probably was Beachmont Avenue, Beachmont Mall, and that was, that's when we got up to 125 employees, and frankly, it wasn't that profitable because we weren't sophisticated enough to put the efficiencies in place.
Meanwhile, the land strategy was paying off. The brothers buy a key parcel in Claremont County that prompts a call from Governor James Rhodes.
We bought Fairfax, and then we bought 2 sites in Blue Ash. Then maybe we went out to Claremont County and assembled a whole bunch of property out there, which was later bought by the state of Ohio to give to Ford Motor Company. And that was in the days of Jim Rhodes, the governor. And we got a phone call, the governor wants to buy your property. Do you want the governor in your office to do it, or can we take care of it otherwise? and we set our price, and that was more than we expected. And
The only thing I had to do with Governor Rhodes was I had bought 500 acres out in Claremont County that was zoned agricultural, and it was before State Route 32, which is the Appalachian Highway, came through. And it was so we had it rezoned to industrial. And then I got a call one morning from a fellow contractor who was a buddy of Governor Jim Rhodes. He said, "Don, I want to meet you for breakfast." And I said, "I already had breakfast." He said, "Well, meet me for a donut." So I met him for a donut. He said, "Big Jim." And I said, "Who's Big Jim?" He said, "Jim Rhodes. Big Jim told me to tell you that we want to buy your property." I said, "What does Jim Rhodes want my property for?" And he said, "Well, it's for a client." Well, later that day, I got a call from the railroad, N&W Railroad, saying, because we had granted them an option on some of our land, "Can we come and see you?" So they came in with the state of Ohio, with the Jim Dirk, who was the development director of the state of Ohio, and several other people, and an unnamed client, which by this time I knew was Ford Motor Company. And so when they walked out later on, we had an agreement to sell every bit of land we had out there.
that enabled us to go out and buy a property out in Tri-County. It was our calling card. We had the land that people wanted, and so if you wanted to build, we had the land, the product, and we had a good reputation for being honest and above board in all our dealings. And so that's how the design build really started growing.
With a burgeoning land portfolio and a sharpened focus on integrated design and construction capabilities, Neyer continues to win big projects and loyal clients. Cintas has relied on Neyer for its real estate solutions since the 1970s. In the late 1980s, this long-time relationship led the Neyer Company to its largest office project to date, a 380,000 square foot headquarters for Cintas, an international leader in the corporate apparel market in Warren County.
Cintas was a monumental job as far as we're concerned. That was right before Ray retired. The first job we did for Dick Farmer was on Ridge Road, and the company wasn't Cintas, it was Acme Uniform and Towel Supply, and Dick Farmer's father, Herschel Farmer, was still active, although Dick was pretty obviously running the show. And Woody Garber was the architect, and all we did was add on a large addition to their laundry plant. And Dick Farmer saw me one day and said, "Can I work with you to design a little office in front of this?" So he and I got together, and without an architect, we designed a little office building in front that we built. From that point on, we were pretty good buddies. Then he said, "I'm going to build a corporate office," so he called us, and he had an architect, Tom Tilsley. And so Tom designed the buildings. We quoted the numbers actually before he designed the buildings, so we had to work with him to control the cost. So we built the office, and we built a large warehouse behind it. That was finished and fine. It must have been 5-10 years later that Dick called and said, "I got to build a big corporate office." Now Cintas was getting to be a big name. And he said, "Do you have any property?" I said, "No, but I'm looking at a couple pieces that they had on 71. There was 70 acres. And so we got it under contract. And then I called Dick up. I said, "I got this property under contract, and we could be happy to sell you 40 or whatever you need here." So he said he was interested, but then he told me, "I got another piece I like better over there." And I went to look at it. I said, "Dick, you can't compare these two pieces of property." So we got involved, and finally he said, "Okay, we'll go here." We designed the buildings and built them for him, and he's been a great client. The only mistake I made was not buying the stock early.
Al Neyer Incorporated acquired more land adjacent to the Cintas project, prime land with Interstate 71 access and visibility. That land acquisition drove the company's momentum and capacity for more office development at Cintas Commerce Park. The land for Interstate Properties Industrial Park in Fairfield was another major investment for the company. The brothers named the first access road through the park La Sainte Drive after their mother's family. Neyer has built dozens of corporate and industrial facilities at Interstate Properties, including Skyline Chili's headquarters and commissary. By the next decade, Neyer developed business parks numbered 14. The company designed and built the majority of businesses located within the parks. By the 1980s, the Neyer brothers thought about putting structure to the company's ability to accommodate the next generation of family members. Their families were growing, eventually to include 20 children. some of which would lead the company into the future. Don, Ray, and Tom devised a plan during this time to sell their shares back to the company upon retiring, and would require any children interested in joining the company to purchase shares. None could be gifted.
At that point in time, for buyouts to work, there had to be a plan. There were more people involved. There were some of the next generation in the company, and there had to be areas for them to go. And so that didn't just happen. You had to plan for that.
Ray Neyer, the eldest brother who oversaw the company's construction projects, working on job sites with his crew, was the first to retire. He didn't leave his hammer and tools behind for long. Ray has been a tireless community volunteer, improving housing in low-income neighborhoods in Cincinnati.
I've taken and had kids do electric work, wire an apartment. Now, no, I don't have them doing, I just have them pulling the wire and making some of the connections in the boxes, but we've rehabbed over 100 homes over there, and then we sell them to first-time home buyers.
In 1981, company sales exceeded $10 million for the first time. Al Neyer Incorporated was building headquarters and manufacturing facilities for dozens of companies. Ray's eldest son, Bill, is the first member of the fifth generation to join the company as a career. Many of the other children had worked on job sites during high school and college. The 1990s was a period of great growth and great change. Don and Tom both completed their retirements and devote their time to community causes. 9 of their children have worked at Al Neyer Incorporated as a career. The brothers' early vision to develop real estate laid the groundwork for the modern-day company, which moved downtown in 2004 in the historic building it had refurbished and expanded in 2000.
The handshake deal is what we were based upon with our customers and with our employees. You know, you go a lot more than that now. I guess my greatest disappointment would be that I used to take the employees out once or twice a year, each individually. You know, I would go out once to know more about them and how they felt and what they did. We got to be too many, I just couldn't do it anymore.
We had a job one time with a friend who was given to us because of a friend architect, and it was an advertising agency. It was Bear, Kemble, and Spicer. And they bought an old building off of Victory Parkway, and they wanted to remodel an office for themselves. And we were doing this job, and fine. It was time and material, and we were cleaning out and doing so forth. And the owner saw me one day, and he looked at me, he was much older than I was. He said, "You're not working for me, you're working for yourself." Oh, I was hurt. I was devastated. And I went back and I thought about it. I came back next day and I said, "You're absolutely right. I wasn't thinking of you, I'm thinking of myself." And it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And that was a great lesson. Over the years, you get these kicked in the pants sometime, and they're tremendous lessons for you. I could tell you a number of others, kicks I've had like that, and they're all well-deserved.
I loved construction because you never did the same thing twice. The building might be the same plans, but there were different contractors, there were different weather, there were different conditions on it. And so it is never boring. You're always dealing with people who you enjoyed working with.
A business is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. And the business is to provide a livelihood for those employed by it, that are employed there. And if something has to suffer, let the business suffer, not the family suffer. Let the relationship be more important than the business. And I think we got out with that in mind. I hope that legacy has come down to the next generation.